Oh, hi, Yashoka. Today we have another very interesting guest on the Fuji Talks show, hailing from a very far off land and coming with a very interesting topic. May I introduce you to Kuroneko Kazuya? Hello.
Hello. Good to be here, Fuji.
So, Kuroneko Kazuya, would you like to introduce yourself? What do you do?
Yeah, sure. I'm a VTuber, so I stream at Kuroneko Kazuya CH and on Twitter and on Twitch. Well, my Twitter handle is Kuroneko_Kazuya. My Twitch handle is Kuroneko Kazuya CH. Yes.
For the audience, all the links will be in the description. Do check them out. They're really cool. So, heading over straight to our topic. Today we will be talking about mythology and slightly dabbling in history as well. Probably. Okay.
Yeah, so my understanding of the word mythologies is really about like the belief systems and sometimes historical systems that a lot of civilizations in the past had. So, for example, you have Egyptian mythology, which was very tied into their way of life. So they had all their gods, festivals, things like that, which all form part of their culture. So for me, mythology is really a part of a nation's culture, their belief system, and in some cases also their politics as well.
Oh, I see. So it's mythology is more to do with if you could, maybe I don't know if this would make sense, but in a way, a history of human interaction or processes or general behavior.
It's definitely got links with sociology as well, for sure. Like, I think sociologists often study like nations, cultures, and mythologies to help understand them better, for sure. Hmm. I think the ones that I'm most familiar with is probably, the Hellenic mythology, so Roman and Greek, and then Egyptian and Norse mythology. But I am trying to learn a bit more about different mythologies, so particularly some Asian mythologies, and also North American a little bit as well.
Oh, I see, I see. So in the which were the two you mentioned? The Hellenic and I think there was one more you mentioned.
Norse and Hellenic are probably the ones
Norse
I'm
and
most
Hellenic.
familiar with.
So are mythologies from your observation of Hellenic and Norse mythologies, are they generally do they seem to have any connections to each other, or does each one have a unique uh, taste of its own?
Yeah, so it's a bit of column A and a bit of column B. Like I think a lot of belief systems throughout different civilizations, even civilizations that are quite far apart, have a lot of similar characteristics. So across Norse and the Hellenic mythologies, thunder god is very important as well, and that's also seen in the ancient Near East. You have the god of, I think it was Babylon was Marduk, who was also associated with thunder, which is also really interesting. So you see a common trend, at least in European and ancient Near Eastern mythology, that thunder is a really important characteristic. So Zeus, Jupiter, Marduk, and Thor as well is really important with thunder as well. So there are lots of connections, but at the same time, there's also really different things. So, the Egyptians have a particularly complex system about the afterlife, the way that people's bodies are uh, buried was really important. So you had to take the things that you would need in the afterlife with you, and there was an understanding that if those things were taken away from you while you were buried, you would lose access to them in the afterlife, and it could cause you some trouble. So that's why the Egyptians had a lot of systems to prevent people from robbing graves and stuff like that, which is really interesting too. Whereas
Oh,
people like the Norse are more concerned about glory in battle and things like that. So the idea that you should die in battle to get sent to their afterlife. So very different systems, but there are definitely some commonalities too, which is really interesting.
oh, I see. So there were specific areas of each of these mythologies where it was unique to their own culture or geographical region. But then, as you mentioned, like the thunder god, there are things which are the thunder being important or thunder and lightning being important, which is seen as a common trend in that entire belt.
Yes, at least in that sort of region. So the European and then also ancient Near East. I'm not super familiar with Far Eastern or South Asian, for example, mythologies, but I'm curious if there's any trends if you know anything more about those regions.
I mean, yeah, the thunder is quite important over here as well in the Indian subcontinent, but it is not seen as one of the most important ones.
Okay.
In the Indian subcontinent, there's a lot, but the basic elements and the sun takes a lot of importance.
Ah, interesting, because then that ties back to North American, because the Aztecs also really valued the sun. So you have Quetzalcoatl, I think. I don't know how you pronounce it. It starts
Yeah, I
with Q and
think
ends
that's
with an
right.
L.
It's Quetzalcoatl
The sun god as well,
and,
yeah. So that's interesting.
and even in Egypt, if I'm not wrong, there's someone named Ra.
Yeah, Ra as well is also sun. So the sun, we're seeing sun and lightning are very important sources,
Yeah.
which I guess is interesting because they're both sources of light in many ways. So the
Even
concept
in
of
terms
light,
of
I guess, being tied
names,
to that.
there's a similarity. Like in Egypt, it's Ra. In India, it's Ravi.
Oh, I actually didn't know that. Interesting.
So that I myself came to know that just a little while ago. I didn't know
Oh, there
about
we
it,
go.
but I guess it had gone out of memory.
Hmm. So the Hellenic world is quite interesting because it really started with the Greeks, and then the Romans pretty much took and adapted a lot of it. So the Roman gods, Mars, Jupiter, Neptune, Pluto, and so on, are basically just copies or stolen in many ways from the Greek gods. So the Romans, I think, had their own belief system, but they found it easier to just assimilate the Greek system and make that like a key part of their identity rather than trying to have two systems existing at the same time, which is really interesting. So.
So
It is
in a
sort of
way, it
mismatch
was
in a lot of ways.
modified.
Could you say that again? Sorry.
So in a way, it was like, was it like modified from the original to when Romans incorporated?
They sort of just replaced, I think, their old gods with the Greek gods because they sort of
I
just said,
see.
well, it's just easier to do like this. That's my understanding. I could be wrong.
So you said like the Hellenic mythology it came from the Greek this thing, and the Romans had a separate system, the different system, and they just
Yeah.
replaced it or assimilated it.
Yeah,
So
basically. So the Romans
was
really
yeah, go
assimilated a
ahead.
lot of. The Romans assimilated a lot of stuff from the people they conquered, and it's probably why their empire was so successful because they didn't let their empire stagnate, at least in the early, parts.
I see. I see.
The Roman Republic and the Empire, but then as time went on, they sort of became stuck in their systems, and that sort of stagnated their empire a bit. Interesting. Yeah. So when the city of Rome was founded, it was very small, and the Greek civilization, so to speak, had been around for a long time. They had their systems very well established. They had their gods very well established, and all that. So the Roman system is very much younger, and then as Rome grew and eventually replaced, I guess, in some ways, the ancient Greek civilizations, they just took it all on board.
Oh, I see.
Um, I believe that they had a lot of the same gods that we've come to know at that stage as well. But I think that the Norse mythology comes out more with the the rise of the Viking Age. So it's around like 800 and something. I can't remember the exact year, but when the Vikings really started spreading around is when that mythology really came into the fore. So the idea that they had to die in battle and that it was good to fight and kill and stuff like that really came out with their adventurous sort of spirit as they started traveling the world instead of just staying in Scandinavia.
Oh, I see. So one could say that the Norse mythology is much more younger compared to the Hellenic mythology.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yes.
And in terms of like, let's say similarities, where you talked about the thunder being of a lot of importance, do you see points in these mythologies where the general term or the general object in the system, like thunder, for example, is the same, but its importance or its the story attached with it, or how what effect this object has in the system is different, even though the object and the base is very same.
I guess in terms of the function, it is probably different. So like with Marduk, I believe it's Babylon. I believe, I'm not 100% sure, that Marduk was the god of the city of Babylon. So at that time, Marduk was like the only god for those people, because in the ancient Near East at this time, it was pretty much every city had their own god, and then as like empires started to form, that's when we got the idea of like pantheons. Because instead of saying your beliefs are wrong, we'll destroy it, they sort of said like, oh, well, we can all incorporate these all together. But I think with thunder in particular, in the Hellenic world, it was definitely the most important. So Zeus and Jupiter are like very much at the head, whereas in the Norse world, Thor is sort of a secondary god. So it probably depends on the region. So I think I don't know much about weather patterns, but I have a feeling that in the Mediterranean, there's probably more thunderstorms and things like that than in Scandinavia. So that probably has at least something to play with it, I think.
Yeah, maybe. And you just mentioned right now about Zeus and Jupiter. So there were two gods for the same, let's say, power, thunder.
Yeah. So Jupiter is basically the Roman version of Zeus. So they're functionally the same god. They're the head of the pantheon. They're the father of many of the other gods, and they're at the head of the their circle of deities, I suppose. And as far as I'm aware, they function pretty much the same way. So those people would ask Jupiter and Zeus for guidance and things like that on matters of leadership and things like that.
Okay. So we could say that maybe we are not clear on the fact that whether Zeus and Jupiter were seen as different, or they were just two different ways of calling the same person.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure, but I do find it interesting how a lot of the belief systems are similar even across the world. So it makes me think that maybe at some point, when humanity was much smaller, that they had a lot of these belief systems already established, and then as humanity spread out across the globe, that's when the like differences sort of came out. But that's just me positing a theory. I don't know much about pre-recorded history of humanity.
Yeah, that is true. Humanity has been there apparently from what the studies. I just looked up something a few days back. Apparently, humanity is they've been there for over 300,000 years or 200,000 years, and the recorded part is like 6,000.
Yes, I believe like the general consensus, although it depends, I guess, how you define recorded history, but a lot of people say that like writing, for instance, was invented around 4,000 or 5,000 BC. So that's something to keep in mind. But like oral histories go back, considerably longer. Like for example, in Australia, the Aboriginal Indigenous histories go back 50,000 years, which is quite incredible.
Yeah.
And they again have their own complex belief system. And I think the head of Indigenous mythology, I'm not a huge expert on it. It's something I really should look up more. A lot of birds and snakes and stuff like that are very eminent. I think less so than like elements, which is interesting.
Oh, so it's more like animal or creature oriented.
Yeah.
Living beings oriented thing. Okay.
Rather than like these all-powerful people. So I think they saw less, the gods were less like us and more like what they saw around them, which I think is interesting. It really highlights the fact that they were more connected to their environment and their nature than perhaps people in Europe or other parts of Asia. Yeah, it's a good question. So I think death is always a really important part in any belief system, because the natural question that comes up in everyone is, okay, I understand what life is and what this existence is like, but what comes after? So the question of death is always something that's really important in any belief system. So I think that every belief system, so for example, in a lot of parts of Asia, you have the ideas of like reincarnation, rebirth, and things like that. So the idea that once you're done with this existence, you are remade into some other form of existence. Whereas, the Egyptians and Norse had this idea that there was like a place, like something else after, rather than coming back here. That was really important. As for the life, that's a good question. So I think a lot of ancient belief systems and mythologies probably less emphasis on life and what you did in your life, and more like what you did after that. So I think it's more like modern belief systems, things like Christianity, Islam, that put more emphasis on making sure that you're doing the right things in life to get to the afterlife. Though I think that with Norse mythology, you couldn't get to Valhalla, which is their afterlife, unless you'd lived a courageous and violent life in many ways. Like if you were a coward and you ran from battle, you wouldn't get into the Norse afterlife because you didn't deserve to be there. It was a warrior's paradise.
Oh, I see. Also, like you mentioned Valhalla, as just like Valhalla, do all mythologies seem to have a middle place between after death and, let's say, for the more extreme generalization, so-called heaven or an ending place? There seems to be a place in between in many places. So in India as well, there's equivalent to basically purgatory.
Okay, yeah. The concept of purgatory and that sort of neutral place, I'm not sure if it's seen in a lot of the mythologies that I'm familiar with. I think a lot of them just have the idea that you either go to the good place or you go to the bad place. So it's very much like, for the Norse, if you were a warrior, you lived courageously, you died in battle, you'd be in Valhalla, and if you didn't, you would go to I don't remember what their afterlife is called, the bad place, but there was very much that idea that if you weren't good, that's where you'd end up. And the Greeks have something similar. So there's the Elysian Fields versus Hades, and ending up there. And I think a lot of particularly Greek writing and the Greek understanding of the afterlife and hell comes from that influenced, I think, a lot of other mythologies in terms of their understanding of the afterlife as well. So like I think a lot of the Western understanding of hell comes from that like Hellenic influence. So like it's the idea that it's underground, that a lot of people have, or it's a place that's like a cave, comes from that.
I see. Because over here also we have a similar thing to purgatory, and basically you supposedly you go there after death, and there's a person sitting there, and they basically have accounts of your entire life. And based on that, you go either of the between. So it's like customs when you enter a country.
Interesting, because the Egyptians have something similar where your heart is weighed against the feather of truth. And so like if your heart is lighter than the feather of truth, it means you lived a good life, and you get to go on to the Egyptian afterlife. I can't remember what it's called. But if you had a lot of sins or a lot of bad things that you did, your heart would be heavier, and then there's this crocodile that would eat your heart, and then I think that would basically meant that you were like condemned to like oblivion or something like that, like your existence would just end. But I'm not 100% sure, but it was something like that.
Oh, I see. And like this process, was this feather like one specific object, or?
Yes, it was like a scales, and the feather was just like always on the scales, and when you died, your heart would be put on there, to compare to the weight of the feather.
Oh, okay. So how do I put this? Was it an actual feather, or was it? I mean, one feather would make no sense. But something like, let's say, I keep forgetting the Grand Cup, which is the one after which the entire Fate series of anime is made.
Oh, the Holy Grail.
Holy Grail, right? Yeah. So is it like a special object like that?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure if it was meant to be like a symbolic thing, like could have been like an actual like weighted object that was just called the Feather of Truth and had like a feather on it, or whether it was literally a feather. But I think in like the depictions I've seen, it is shown at least as a literal feather, like in the hieroglyphics and the tomb art and stuff like that. It's shown as there's the judge with the scales and the feathers there, and the heart is about to go on the scales.
Oh, I see. So let's suppose the heart was weighed and the heart is lighter. So the
Mm,
person still needs like objects and stuff
yes.
to go
Yes.
with them, assets as like furniture in the new place, or like how is it connected? Is that recorded, that what help does your assets do?
So I think it's like literally like stuff to live off, like food and things like that. And some pharaohs, quite horrifically, were buried with like servants. So like they would
Oh right,
take
yeah.
their servants into the tomb, like execute them in massive numbers, and just bury them with the pharaoh to make sure that the pharaoh had enough, people to look after them after they're in the afterlife. So I think it was, my understanding is literally like, you know, their vision of the afterlife was that it was somewhat similar to Earth, but you could
Hmm.
only have what you like actually brought with you.
So it's like moving houses,
Pretty much, yeah. That's a good way of
like
looking at it.
in an oversimplified manner, obviously.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Uh,
The Holy Grail is connected mostly to Christian mythology. So the Holy Grail, I'm pretty sure, is the cup that Jesus drank out of at the Last Supper. So it's this idea that it's an object that was touched by, like, literally like the divine, and that if you drink out of it, you'll live forever because you know the cup was held by the most important figure in Christianity.
I see, I see. And okay, so the do mythologies often have like a not exactly central but really important object like this? Is it again, is it general to all or many mythologies, and do these objects also have mention in like multiple mythologies?
Yeah. I'm not sure if there's objects that have crossover. I think a lot of the religions that have these like artifacts, I'll call them, um, I think tend to be newer. So I think in Norse, for example, the only objects I can think of are like the weapons of the gods. So I think Odin had the spear called Gungnir or something like that. Thor has Mjolnir. I don't know if the Norse believed that these objects like were actually out there somewhere, or if they were just in the hands of the gods. But those are the objects that I can think of there. Um, but a lot of things like the Ark of the Covenant and the Holy Grail are objects that are believed to be out there by a lot of people, which are more related to Judaism and Christianity than ancient mythologies.
I see, I see. And like this trend doesn't really come off as that apparent in like older mythologies.
Not that I'm familiar with, no.
I see, I see, I see. Interesting. And okay, is there any connection in terms of like, so let's say Hellenic, Norse, and to an extent Christian mythology as well. They all seem to have a geographical closeness to each other.
Yeah.
So is this again part of like a civilizational link where from overlapping time spans people were able to like interact with each other through maybe trade or migration, and then without knowing maybe one or two said systems got converted into like a multitude of systems?
Yeah, I think that's entirely possible. So, um, particularly with the older mythologies, I have no doubt that, as, like, for example, let's say you're living in, the ancient Near East, so things that are now like modern day Syria or Iraq, and your nation got, destroyed or conquered by another nation, and you fled to another nearby city or nation. There's no doubt that you would bring your belief system with you, and then if enough people would then recognize your system, that it would become incorporated into the local people's belief system. So I think that sort of thing happens a lot. And then the links between Greek, Roman, and Egyptian mythology, I would say, probably came in a big way from trade as well. So people sailing across the Mediterranean, bringing their goods with them, bringing stories with them. Those stories would spread, and then people would eventually, in some cases, come to maybe believe those stories and take those mythologies as part of their own.
Their own.
So I definitely think that human interaction plays a huge part in the commonalities.
I see. Well, yeah, that is at least one case I myself know of that I was pretty surprised to hear about is in India there's so for gods and like demons there's terms called devas for gods
I have heard of
and
David.
yeah, asuras for demons. And I came to know this recently. Apparently, in Persia, in ancient times, it's the same. There's a word for gods, there's a word for demons, but it's exactly the same words but flipped.
Yeah, I've heard of Devas as used for demons rather than gods, which is interesting. Um, I think it was from a video game actually, where the Devas were like featured as I can't remember what the game was called, but the Devas were in the game and they were very powerful evil creatures. So it's interesting that that word is flipped. So I'm not sure how that happened.
I
It's
mean, it
interesting, but I
does,
guess it
it
could be a
does,
case.
it does kind of make sense due to geographical proximity.
Yeah, I was going to say it makes sense in that, one person's god is another person's demon. So the geographical proximity means that whether you're in Persia or India, you would have been aware of all of these, figures, but you believed in your ones. So in the case of people in India, you believed that the Devas were good, whereas the Ashuras were bad. Whereas in Persia, you think the opposite because you're like, well, we believe in the Ashuras, they believe in the Devas, so the Devas must be bad because, ours are good. So that's interesting, actually. I didn't know that there was that word link, but there you go.
Yeah, apparently there's a lot of like word links that which otherwise you would not know there are similarities, which makes it apparent when you dig it up. That is one thing I've been looking upon recently. Uh, Kind of digressing from the topic, talking about like word links.
Oh,
Uh,
I love this topic, so please, let's digress.
oh, sure. Okay, yeah, that does still make sense. We did say we would be tapping into history a bit.
Yeah.
So one thing I came to know about a few years back and I thought was really cool is, uh, so just a disclaimer for you, Cass. In India, we have tons and tons and tons of languages.
Mm-mm.
So there's in southern India there's one language called Tamil,
Mm.
and there the word for your mom and dad is amma and appa.
Mm.
And apparently it's the exact same word in South Korea.
Wow.
And
Because I'm aware that at least Hindi, so it's the primary language in large parts of northern India, right?
yes,
Hindi is in the same broad language group as a lot of European groups. So it's believed that at some point there was this language which linguists call Proto-Indo-European, which basically all these people spoke at some point, and then over time, as they spread out geographically, they, formed their own languages, which is really interesting. So
yeah, I
and even
I do
Mama and
know
Appa
a
are
little bit of.
quite similar to like Mama and Papa.
Yeah, I do know. How do I put this? One kind of a specific in terms of what you just said, as in Hindi, and there's a few other languages. Uh, they all come from a script, writing script called Devanagari, and there's a
Oh.
much older language, which yes, obviously it also has languages predating it, called Sanskrit.
Mm.
So
Oh.
Sanskrit and Latin had a lot of overlapping. It's really hard to date it exactly, so you can't really tell which is older and which influences, because there's always newer and newer claims. But in English, for the word trigonometry, there's a Sanskrit word called something trigon. I'll just look it up while we're at it,
Yeah.
just to get it accurate.
But I think the topic of linguistics is definitely linked to mythologies, because if the mythologies are common, it would make sense that the languages would be common in some degree as well.
Yeah.
Because it is like we still have no idea. Like historians and anthropologists and stuff have no idea like where humanity exactly came from. But it is clear that at some point we were much closer together than we all are now in terms of geography and language and culture and things like that.
Oh yeah, here's the word. Trikonamiti.
Wow.
And
It's always the same.
Trikona, the word Trikona translates to triangle.
Oh yeah.
So 3 is literally if you break down Trikona, 3 literally means 3 in English also.
Yeah.
And Kona is corners.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
3 corners make up. And then you have Matraha, which changes to mother. Bhratraha, which changes to brother. So they are also like, there's some connection. And English takes, as far as I know, I don't know enough, but as far as I know, English takes a lot of stuff, words and meanings from Latin.
Mm.
So Latin and
Yeah.
Sanskrit seems to have had a lot of overlapping.
That is really interesting.
And one other thing, which in terms of like human connections and influences, I very recently got to know about. Do you know about this word Freemasons?
I've heard of the Freemasons, yes.
So this is just going off of like really narrow observation I've had. I need to look it up more. But apparently, a mason is somebody who carves. It's a carver. You make stuff, and
A mason is somebody who makes things out of stone, yeah.
yeah. A mason is somebody who carves, who makes like, let's say, statues, buildings. And Freemasonry came to, I guess it went to Americas from Europe, and came to the Europe from let's say the whole Middle Eastern belt. And it wasn't really called Freemasons till I think it reached America. So the whole there's one how do I put this? It's not theory. There is historical evidence behind it. There's a line of history which says that they were Masons who traveled from India to ancient Lebanon and Egypt. And there were to build certain temples. So there were some structures which needed like good masonry, really intricate masonry. Apparently Indian masons went from here to there. They had there were a lot of strifes and different misunderstandings amongst people. So we all know there were a lot of conflicts in the past. And apparently, as a hidden way of sustaining themselves, they developed a new way of communicating, and that new way of communicating birthed a new culture of Freemasonry. So because there's this really, I mean, I guess it's not in the best of shapes after thousands of years, but apparently there's a temple in ancient Lebanon which has two things which technically you shouldn't be able to see outside of India in terms of like mythology, which is, one is the pillars and everything are decorated with lotuses. And the other is that there's a block, there's a cylinder with 16 points in it, like it's a particular geometrical design.
Yeah.
And that is apparently for a particular you can say ritual for a spiritual teacher.
Interesting.
So the 16 different geometrical details on it is 16. Yeah, wasn't that a wonderful experience? We did talk a little bit more, roughly about 10 minutes more, but unfortunately there was an error with the recording, so I couldn't bring that section to you as well. It was a very interesting conversation through and through, not just any particular part. I learned a lot, and I was happy I was able to speak a lot myself, like tell Kaz about some stuff I knew as well. All in all, I had a really wonderful time. I had a blast. Hope you all had a blast as well learning. Again, all of Kaz's links will be in the description below. Do check them out. Wonderful person. And yes, we did place Kaz's post on the corner wall as well. So yeah, the tradition continues. I had a good time. Hope you all has a good time as well. I'll see you again next time. Bye bye. Matane.